Have you ever played a game where the rules seem to change depending on who was playing? Huh? Well, welcome to the criminal justice system. And so you are right in the right place. This is lesson 1, right, of criminal justice literacy 101. I am Professor Courtney Teasley, Esquire, and I am so excited to be here with you all. If you have not already, make sure you go hit the link in our bio and join the Google Classroom where you can download the syllabus, as well as go to our TikTok shop and you're able to buy our book, The Easy Way to Learn Your Rights. We'll be doing this one. I think it is maybe week 3 or so you got time to get it. And the other book you'll want to get is The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. Super excited to dive in, guys. Now, and I have my computer right here, so I'm going to be looking forward back and forth. Y'all we're about to dive in. Let's dive in, right? If you get caught up in this system, there are different players, but not everyone is going to have the same power, right? Look at me. If you don't understand how this game is played and who are the players in it, what are their roles, what are the actual rules, you will lose, okay? But first, let's discuss how the criminal justice system was created in America. Are you ready? All right. The American criminal justice system was built on colonial law, English common law, and deeply racist foundations that actually evolved to maintain social control rather than provide true justice. Let's start with the 1600s to 1776. Now, this is the copy in the British model era. Now, when European settlers, they arrived in North America, they brought English common law. Now, what did that mean? Defined crimes and punishments based on property rights, gave wealthy land-owning white men power over law enforcement, and used public shaming, corporal punishment, and executions as common penalties. But guess who was criminalized? Indigenous people who were criminalized for resisting colonization, enslaved Africans subject to separate, harsher laws that treated them as property and not people, and poor white people and women. They had fewer legal rights than wealthy men. Now, the 1700s to 1865. Let's call this the slave patrols in America's first law enforcement era, okay? Before modern police forces, slave patrols were the first form of organized law enforcement in America. And their job was to catch and punish escaped enslaved people, suppress slave revolts, and control black communities through racial terror. And here's a fact for you. Many southern states made it illegal for black people to gather in large groups, own weapons, and learn to read, because guess what? Knowledge is power, right? And even after slavery was abolished, these patrols evolved into modern policing and continued enforcing racist laws. And now we come to the 1865 to 1900s. Let's call this the post-slavery foundation of mass incarceration. Now, we've all heard about that 13th Amendment that was put into effect in 1865 that abolished slavery except for punishment of a crime. And this led to black codes and convict leasing. Now, what is black codes, right? Those are laws that criminalize black people for things like loitering or not having a job. And then convict leasing was states arresting black men for petty crimes and lease them to private companies as free labor, right? Basically rebranded slavery. And here's another fact for you. Alabama didn't officially abolish convict leasing until 1928. And this brings me to the 1900s to the 1960s. And let's just call this one the Jim Crow laws and racist policing. Now, Jim Crow laws created legal segregation and enforced racial oppression through what? Biased courts. All white juries meant black defendants rarely got a fair trial. Police brutality. Law enforcement targeted black communities under the guise of keeping order. And then voter suppression. Felony convictions were used to strip black men of their voting rights. Here's an example for you. In 1955, despite overwhelming evidence, Emmett Till's murderers were found not guilty by an all-white jury. And that brings me to the 1960s to current day. Let's call this the tough on crime era, with full-blown mass incarceration. Now, key moments that actually expanded the system were, let's talk about the 1960s, the civil rights protests, which led to more aggressive policing of black communities. Then 1971, Nixon's war on drugs, targeting What did that lead to? Targeting black and brown people under excuse of drug control. And then 1980s, Reagan's policies, which equal mandatory minimums, 3-strike laws, and crack versus cocaine sentencing disparities, i.e. harsher punishments for drugs used in black communities. And then finally, in 1994, we have Clinton's crime bill, which brought more prisons, harsher sentencing, and police militarization. And we know the result of this. The U.S. has, 5% of the world population, but over 20% of the world's prisoners? With black people making up less than 14% of the entire population, but still being 6 times more incarcerated, right? This creates a broken system that is not built for justice, but for control, right? And this modern criminal justice system still reflects its racist origins. We can see that in police disproportionately targeting black and brown people, bail systems punishing the poor, prosecutors that push plea deals versus fair trials, and private prisons that are profiting off of incarceration. So as you can see, America's criminal justice system was never designed to create fairness. It was just built to protect power. Now, this is why real justice is going to require us disrupting the system, not just reforming it, right? And I want you all to make sure that you grab your new Jim Crow book. I want you to listen and read the first chapter. Actually, just the introduction. Start with just the introduction. I want you to have that done by our next week's class, okay? Now, let's learn about the players involved in this system. First, we have the government. We'll call them the rule makers. These are the people who write the laws, right? The Congress, state lawmakers, the Supreme Court, they set the rules of the game. And guess what? They rarely play in it themselves. Next, we have law enforcement. Those are the enforcers. Those are the police, maybe your sheriff's office, the DEA, FBI, etc. Their job is to enforce the rules. But here's the problem. They have a lot of power over who gets called out and who doesn't. Then we have the prosecutors. Now let's call them opposing team's coach. And of course I say opposing team because by trade, I am a criminal defense attorney. Prosecutors decide who gets charged and what kind of deal they offer. So they're literally trying to convict you. So that's why we like to think of them as opposing team's coach. Now let's talk about your team's coach. That means defense attorney or public defenders. Now, all are defense attorneys. However, some just work for the state. And if they work for the state and they have to take cases, they have usually a bigger bulk load, they are public defenders, just meaning that they work for the state as a defense attorney, right? Then you have private defense attorneys. We'll talk about that in later weeks, the difference between all attorneys. With defense attorneys, if you get arrested, you need one. This is literally the only person in the courtroom who is legally required to be on your side. But what happens when the other team's coach, the prosecutor, has all the resources and your team's coach is maybe drowning in cases? It's no longer a fair fight, right? And then the judge, they're like the referee. Even though they're supposed to be neutral, some of them play favorites. Some of them take campaign money from the very prosecutors they work with. And if you don't have a lawyer really fighting for you, you could be sentenced before you even had a real chance to fight. And then the jury, they're like the fans, but they don't always cheer for you. In theory, juries are supposed to decide if you're guilty or innocent, but juries don't always look like you. They don't always understand your life, and sometimes they just believe whatever the prosecutors tell them. So let's recap. The police decide who entered the system. The prosecutors try to convict you. Defense attorneys often lack resources and are maybe drowning in cases. The judge isn't always fair. And the jury, well, let's just say, history hasn't always been so kind. Now, knowing all of this, do you still think justice is the goal of this criminal justice system? Which is why we call it the CJSU, the criminal justice system of oppression. On Wednesday, we'll talk about innocent until proven guilty and what that really means. Drop a fire sign in the comments if you're starting to actually see how the system is stacked against what we call the damn community, the disproportionately affected, marginalized minority. I'll see y'all on Wednesday for our next lesson.